Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of The Resilience Show. And we have Paul Whelan, and we have an exclusive interview with him. It's the first time he's on a long-form podcast since his release from a Russian prison just in August of 2024. So this is brand new, and we're super excited to talk to him. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome to Texas. Welcome back home to America.
Exactly.
Also, you just got home.
Right.
So
I'm happy to be here. Happy to be with you. It was nice having a warm blast of air in my face this morning, coming from Michigan and the frigid temperatures.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
it's warm in the South right now. I mean, this is duck hunting season. I just got back from a duck hunt with the Robertsons, the Duck Dynasty family. I was thinking while we were out there, this is the first time I've ever been duck hunting where I've been hot, and it's terrible for duck hunting. And the Robertsons, who's been they're the duck hunting experts of the world, they said it was the warmest and hottest day of duck season they ever had, and it was the worst day of duck hunting.
Yeah,
so,
we've lost all of our ducks. They've all come down here.
Exactly. We're happy to kill them too. Yeah. But for those that don't know your story, because your story is kind of just getting out there. Unfortunately, it's while you were in captivity, your story wasn't getting widespread by mainstream media like it should have been. I want to make sure the audience knows who you are, so I want to read your bio, and I have a bio here for you. Paul Whelan is a United States Marine whose extraordinary story has recently captured global attention. During his career as a Marine, Paul served 2 tours in Iraq. In December of 2018, during what was meant to be a routine trip to Moscow, Russian authorities arrested Paul and accused him of espionage, a charge he completely denied. What followed was a journey of survival as Paul endured years in captivity in a Russian prison under challenging conditions. Paul was left out of 2 previous prisoner swaps between the White House and Russia, including the one that freed U.S. women's basketball star Brittney Griner. Despite the immense adversity, Paul maintained hope and displayed personal resilience during his captivity until his release only 4 months ago in August of 2024. Since his release, Paul has focused on rebuilding his life and sharing his story, shedding light on the realities of geopolitical tensions and the resilience required to endure such an ordeal. This is the first time Paul sat down for a podcast interview, and we're extremely honored, Paul. So welcome to the show. You've been a Marine.
Yeah.
You've been a combat veteran. You've been a police officer.
Right.
You've been a prisoner of years of years of captivity in Russia. You've had an incredible, crazy journey, and you've displayed incredible resilience and just the posture and tone in which you're sitting here today after only being released a few months ago. And I want to start off with just saying, what's it feel like right now for you to be free after these years of captivity?
It's a unique experience. Everything seems familiar, but it's brand new. Traveling, driving a car, just being free to do whatever I want. It's surreal. There's no one looking over my shoulder. There are no fences, no gates, no barbed wire. I'm in a country where I understand the languages. I understand the culture. So it's an incredible free feeling, and you can't beat this kind of freedom. People don't understand just how bad some areas of the world are, and how the people are oppressed. And Russia is one of those countries. So being here now, doing the sorts of things I'm doing, is great. It's wonderful.
Yeah, technology changes quickly. So you were in captivity for 5 years.
5 years, 7 months, 5 days.
Yeah, you were accurate with that. I'm sure
I count, every day.
Did technology change? Like, what's new that in America that you hadn't seen before you left? Like, what'd you come back and was like, cell phones, TV? Like, what's new? What's different?
I'm doing pretty well with iPhones and iPads. Mm-hmm. The first time I used Lyft and a Tesla turned up, I had no idea how to get in. And then once I got to my destination, I had no idea how to get out. So, just simple things like that. I've run into some technology challenges here and there. Usually I have to ask one of my friends to ask their teenage son or daughter to help me through it. But for the most part, I'm doing all right. It's interesting going through the airports with the, security is the way it is. You can go through really quickly. Delta has digital ID now, so you don't even have to take out your license, and using Clear and TSA PreCheck, all of these things, help you go through. It took me a little while to get used to it, but I'm doing okay.
Upon coming home, I mean, I know that had to be a process with the government and things like that, but What's the first thing you did personally? Like, do you like, I have to go do this one thing?
Well, I was in Texas at Fort Sam Houston, and I wanted a steak and I wanted cheesecake. So we went downtown and, ate well. But, my family was coming down to visit. I had Marine friends were coming into town, and, I was kind of in a holding pattern. I was like, okay, I need a good meal and I'm not waiting. So we went and did
Where'd
that.
you go for it?
Just downtown San Antonio.
Was it a particular restaurant?
I forgot the name.
Okay.
It's a nice steakhouse, though. It's right on the Riverwalk.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had a great steak and great cheesecake, so we had that.
Yeah, that'd probably be my choice too. Good Texas steak and I love cheesecake. That's my dessert of choice. Could you talk a little bit about your time in the Marines? Like, just kind of set the stage. You're a Marine. You're a police officer. So before all this happened, you had a history of being a patriot, a servant to our community as both Marine and a police officer. You're a combat veteran. Tell us a little bit about your time as a Marine.
Well, I was born in Canada, and I was naturalized when I was 19, and one of the reasons was so that I could become a police officer and serve my community. It wasn't until a little later that I was actually 24, I went into the Marine Corps Reserve. The same reason, to serve, my country, my adopted country. I served all sorts of, short tours of active duty as a reservist. And then when we were called to serve after 9/11, obviously I went, and I was overseas for 5.5 years, bouncing back and forth between San Diego, in Al-Assad, Al-Anbar province, Haditha, that area. It was a challenging time, and I had good friends with me, good people, a lot of support from my family and friends back in the States and in Canada, England, and Ireland, my other countries of citizenship. So I did well. My primary MOS admin, doing a lot of the casualty assistance type things. That was a bit stressful, to be quite honest. It was hard especially when we were in CONUS and reports would come back and, you knew the people, or it was a friend of yours that had been injured or killed, and then going out and making notifications and doing that sort of thing. So that was, more or less what I did.
Yeah. Just from what I know of your story, and I haven't asked you this personally yet, but at some point you started visiting Russia outside of the military. What was the connection there?
Well, it's actually kind of benign. Mm-hmm. One of my friends in the Marines in San Diego went from our unit to MSG at the Moscow embassy.
So for those listening, MSG is Marine Security Guard, which
right? Yeah, the Marine
Corps guards the embassies.
Yeah, the Marines guard the embassies and diplomatic posts. And he said, "Hey, if anyone's interested in coming to visit, let me know, and we'll set it up." So I was in Iraq, and we had the opportunity to take 2 weeks leave, and I discussed with my family, what would be best, coming home, or visiting family in, say, England, or going somewhere else. And we decided that it would, be a little bit difficult for me to come home, be home 2 weeks, and then have to leave again. So the best choice would be to see relatives or go somewhere. And I thought, hey, there's this open invitation for Moscow. I've never been there. Let me see what I can do. My friend and the people at the embassy set it up. So I went to Moscow for a week, went to St. Petersburg for a week. The Marines and the consulate staff took care of me. And that was my first exposure to Russia.
I've traveled all over the world. I've been to like 60 countries. Some countries require a visa. Others you could get a kind of on-site visa when you. I've never been to Russia. Do you get a visa in advance, or?
You do. So what we had to do on that first trip, that was 2006. I was going from Iraq to Russia and then back to Iraq. We had to get a visa. I had to have a letter of introduction and invitation from the ambassador at the time, and they considered me an official guest of the U.S. Embassy. It's very, very common for U.S. citizens to visit foreign countries through the embassies and whatnot. So it was a matter of doing all the paperwork and getting the visa and just getting the approval to go. Of course, the Marine Corps approved my travel and stay and whatnot.
Well, the reason I ask is while it's a normal process, this kind of thing automatically puts you on the radar, right? Now the country of Russia knows who you're visiting, you're a Marine, and whether it's passive or not, you are on the radar of their intelligence agencies, whatever,
Right.
as you go. So I was just kind of curious if, you having a visa in advance kind of puts you on that blip on their radar.
It does, and you're asked all sorts of information when you're filling out these visa applications. You have to provide copies of your passports, talk about your citizenships, your military and education, things like that.
They're profiling you.
Yeah, they're putting a profile together. They're putting all their information into a computer, and they'll use it for their purposes. One of the interesting things is when I first went to Russia, the ambassador was Bill Burns, and fast forward now, Bill Burns is the director of CIA, and of course, when Bill Burns took that mantle, the Russians jumped up and down with, look, see, you've got friends in high places, and of course, I didn't, but they thought I did.
Right. Yeah. Going all the way back to your.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of why I was asking that, because they start building a profile way back, and clearly they knew from that original visa application. So fast forward 2018, you're arrested. Before we get into that, what was the purpose of this visit? How many times have you visited prior?
I'd been 4 times prior, and one of the occasions, I was in Moscow for a week. I took my parents. They grew up in England during the Cold War. They'd never been, to the east side of the Iron Curtain. So
yeah,
they said they didn't, they were interested in going. So we set up a week's trip, staying at the normal touristy type places, going to the normal touristy type places. It was perfectly safe back then. Flights were cheap, hotels were cheap. It wasn't considered a problem by the State Department, other agencies. So there we went. In 2018, I'd actually gone earlier in the year, stayed with some friends, and saw other people. Again, their economy was bad, and that helps us because, flights to Moscow, you can go for $800.
Yeah.
You can't go that inexpensively to Europe. So hotels.
It's beautiful, right? Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah,
country.
there's a lot of history. There's a lot of architecture from their old king, the Tsar, his palaces, the Kremlin in Moscow, and the word Kremlin. When we talk about the Kremlin, we usually mean the Kremlin in Moscow. But every city in Russia has a Kremlin. It's basically like the city hall. That complex. So all of these cities in Russia, they have the Kremlin.
It's like our capital, right? We have state capital.
State capital, yeah. City hall, et cetera, et cetera. So you see all this architecture. It goes back hundreds of years. The Soviets tore down a lot of things, and they used the marble from churches and whatnot to build the subways and train stations. But there's a lot that they preserved, and so there is a lot of history. There is a lot to see. St. Petersburg is very, very European, and it's not a bad place to go for history, for architecture, things like that. Their culture aligns with ours in some ways. It diverts in a lot of ways also, especially their morals and ethics.
Which is a religious persecution there, right?
Well, they have the Russian Orthodox Church, but they're not very Christian in the way they do things.
Right.
And that's something that you realize very, very quickly when you're over there.
Yeah, the kind of moral fabric of the country is much different than the moral fabric. Even though we have a pretty backslidden culture here in America, that I think you could feel the moral fabric of those cultures are different when you travel those places.
Right, and they try to hide behind religion, where they say, well, the Russian Orthodox Church said this, or the Russian Orthodox Church said that, and it's really Putin and his friends, scheming and coming up with things that just don't make sense. That in a normal Christian world, none of our religions would ever say, yeah, that's a good idea.
Right. So, early in your life, 2006 was your first trip to Russia. You enjoyed the trip enough to where you go back, 3 or 4 times to vacation there. And then this trip that you get arrested on, what was the purpose of that trip?
Well, I'd been to China many times. I'd been to Germany, France, all over Europe. I'd taken my parents to South Africa. I'd been to Brazil, Mexico, Peru, India, Japan. Yeah. And I took the normal precautions. I went to places that the State Department said was safe. And at the time in late 2018, one of my friends from the Marines, he was getting married to a Russian lady who had lived in the States, educated in the States. They worked together. they wanted to have a wedding with, with members of both families, but with visas and travel, it can be expensive from people or for people from Russia to visit the States. So we had a ceremony here and then went to Moscow to have a ceremony there. The intent was to have a ceremony that, her family could partake in. So that was the purpose of the trip. Nothing nefarious. We stayed at the Metropole Hotel on Red Square. We went to just normal touristy type places. The day I was abducted, we had gone on a tour of the Kremlin buildings. And one of the reasons that I had gone is to facilitate that sort of thing because I'd been there before.
Right.
I didn't speak Russian, and the Russian I know now isn't very good. But yeah, it's prison Russian. But I had been to these different landmarks, these museums and whatnot. I knew how to get around the city. They have a really good metro system, and I went basically to be a tour guide.
Tell us about the abduction. How it originally. I mean, it came out of nowhere. Like it was completely just caught you off guard.
Yeah. So basically, what happened? A friend of mine. We were in my hotel room. We're getting ready after touring the Kremlin. It was about 4:30, 5 o'clock. We were getting ready to go to dinner. We were meeting all the families and whatnot. Another friend of mine came to the hotel room unexpectedly, and it wasn't 100%, abnormal for people to just stop by, say hi when I was in town or whatever.
Sure.
And he came in. He's speaking to my other friend who was Russian, and I was in the bathroom actually getting ready. And there's video on the internet of this. It's kind of comical. This guy walks in. And he has a flash drive, and he said, "Hey, these are photos and videos from earlier in the year when you stayed, with my family." And I had stayed with his wife and brother and his parents at their cottage, and we'd taken some photos and videos. I mean, this kind of stuff you would transfer through email or using WhatsApp or what have you. It was nothing, professional or big videos or anything. And I said, okay, whatever. So he had this thumb drive. We're standing in the bathroom. He gives it to me. I put it in my pocket. I'd known him for 10 years. I had no reason to doubt him. He was a low-level functionary in the border guard, the kind of guy that at the airport would, look at your passport, stamp a visa, that sort of thing.
You originally met him?
I'd met him through friends on an earlier visit.
Okay.
I knew from the circle of friends that I had, everybody knew each other. And I knew that, he wasn't in the FSB. He wasn't a high-ranking official. He wasn't into anything operational. He was just a low-level admin kind of guy.
Yeah.
And, 5 minutes after he gave me the thumb drive, the door opens with this person opening it, and in comes the FSB.
The guy that gave you a thumb drive actually opened the door.
He opened the door, yeah. And so, these guys come in, they've got black masks on, they've got vests on, they have guns and whatnot. They have nothing that says police, nothing says FSB, nothing that identifies themselves at all.
Can you tell us what FSB is?
That's the Federal Security Service.
Okay.
FSB is in Russian, and I can never remember what the name stands for. But it's the modern KGB. And, they changed the name, but they can't change the shame because they still do this kind of stuff, abducting innocent people. So here comes the FSB. They grab me, they put me in cuffs, and they say, Mr. Whelan, you're under arrest for espionage in English. Mm-hmm. And
this is before they see the thumb drive. What's on it?
Yeah.
They don't know what's on the thumb drive.
Well, they did because it was all a setup. But I mean, I'd never seen the thumb drive. I had never accessed the thumb drive. I didn't have a laptop or anything to access the thumb drive. It was 5 minutes after I'd gotten it. I just walked out of the bathroom. And I said to them, I haven't committed espionage. And they said, well, we think you have. And I asked my friend, my Russian friend who was standing there, he wasn't in cuffs or anything like that. I said, well, who are these people? What are they doing? And so he asked them in Russian. And then, they pulled out their little red books that, their identification. And he looked at it and said, they are the FSB. It's the SVR. That's their counterintelligence type guys. And, he's just standing there like, why are you arresting him? He hasn't done anything. I've been here the whole time. We haven't done anything. They didn't pay any attention to him. I was sitting on the bed talking to them. They ushered my friend out. And, when I was eventually taken from their room, I saw down the hall that they were talking to this guy, and they were also talking to the guy who had come into the room with the flash drive. Now, when I got to the police station, with the FSB people. There was a translator, and she had two documents. They were in English, copies of their espionage law and copies of their treason law. And they said, well, you committed espionage, and your friend Ilya, the one with the thumb drive, he committed treason. And I'm thinking to myself, if the FSB had just caught Ilya, the guy with the thumb drive, committing treason, and there was another Russian in the room, he would obviously be committing treason also. They would have been just beating them mercilessly in the hallway, but they weren't. When I was taken out of the room, the FSB is just standing there chatting to him. And the friend of mine, they actually let him go a few hours later. And obviously the one with the thumb drive, it was a setup. But there were plenty of FSB people there. They had communication vans, they had all sorts of people. It wasn't like a couple low-level FSB officers decided they'd have a few vodkas and then find an American and arrest him and cause a lot of trouble. This was an operation that came down from the top.
Obvious question that a lot of people would wonder at this point hearing your story is, why you?
Yeah.
Yeah, why you?
Good question.
I'm sure, look, there's probably lots of Americans in Moscow or Russia at the time. Like, why you specifically?
That's an unanswered question. I'd gone to Russia a couple of times. I'd never done anything there that was more than just being a tourist. The people I knew were just low-level functionary type people. Made sure that I didn't go to military bases. I didn't go to military towns. I didn't go off the beaten track. Nothing that would have raised any alarms.
But at this time, though, if you go back to the profiling thing, your original visa would have been approved by the ambassador, who's now the head of the CIA.
Yeah. So the Russians actually said I was a brigadier general. I was a secret agent, and I worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency. That was their story.
Okay.
Now, what they really think, who knows? For some reason, they put their story together and decided I was the guy.
And so they put that out as propaganda.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a blotter, like an arrest report that goes out to the public. They just arrested a 2-star general that works for the DIA.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it went out, right?
Yeah. But that's how it goes out, and the Russians would believe that because they believe anything. But if you think, why would the U.S. send a brigadier general to Russia to get a thumb drive of information, which they said would have been photos and the names of border guard students, so cadets at their border guard school? Why would the U.S. send a general to get that information, right? It could just be sent over WhatsApp or sent over the internet. So, the whole thing fell apart very, very quickly, and, the media debunked it.
How did you find out what was actually on the thumb drive, or what was said to be
on the thumb drive? I never did. Well, the only thing I know was from the court documents that they said I was after the names and photos of students at the border guard school. And, this is an interesting part because we have those documents. Mm-hmm. We have copies of those documents, and the media has them. And, the Russians would say later, well, he wanted information about FSB officers. Well, the court documents don't say that. The court documents say that I wanted the names and photos of border guard school cadets. So, you see this kind of changing narrative where the Russians are trying to make make me seem important, make the case seem important, and it falls apart because of their own documentation or just them not understanding our culture and our system.
Right.
And then it got to a point where, in 2019, when Vadim Krasikov, the FSB assassin, was arrested in Germany, the Russians were like, well, we don't care what we said. We've got him. You've got Krasikov. We want to do an exchange, and Paul's not coming home until we do.
So the motivation behind bogus charges like this, or for geopolitical leverage for future negotiations.
So I'll take you back in time a little bit.
Okay.
1986, a man named Danilov, he was the station chief for the U.S. News and World Reports.
Okay.
He's in Moscow. In D.C., the FBI arrested a Russian spy. As soon as that happened, the Russians grabbed Danilov and said, well, he's a spy. You give us our person, we'll give you your person. Well, of course, Danilov wasn't a spy. He sat for 3 weeks in Lefortovo prison where I was, and they did a quick exchange. Nothing like that had happened since. There was a gentleman named Pope that was arrested in I think it was 2000 or 2001, and he spent 8 weeks at Lefortovo. He was picked up, but it wasn't for an exchange purpose. I think it was just, Putin's new. He wants to show the U.S. that he's boss, so he grabs a U.S. tourist, holds him for a little while. But in December of 2018, the Canadians arrested a lady from China. She worked for Huawei, and she had some warrants from the U.S. Due to financial fraud. The Canadians arrested her, and they were holding her for extradition. The Chinese said, "Hey, we want her back." The Canadians said, "No, she's going to the States." So the Chinese grabbed two Canadians named Michael and Michael. The Chinese said, "Well, we've got these two. If you don't give her back, then, they'll rot in prison for espionage." A deal was done. The two Michaels returned home, and the lady from China, she went home also. But this story came up in Russian media. A lady named Maria Butina had been arrested in the United States for failing to register as a foreign agent, which really means she's a spy. It's an easy charge,
Sure,
better than espionage. And it came up in the media. Russian media asked Putin, this is what's happening with the Canadians and the Chinese. Why don't we do something like that to help Maria Butina? And, obviously other Russians that are in U.S. prison, Viktor Bout and Konstantin Yurchenko. And Putin said, well, there's no way that we would ever hold a foreigner hostage. We would never hold a hostage and do a trade. Nothing like that would ever happen. Now, if a foreigner comes to Russia and breaks the law, yes, we would arrest them. But we'll never do any of this hostage kind of thing. And we will do everything we can to help Butina get home. 8 days later, they arrest me. So, you see this telegraphing of intentions by Putin. And when Putin says he won't do something, that means he will.
Right.
You can't trust him. And he telegraphs what he's going to do with these statements and proclamations and whatnot.
Was there ever an attempt to trade you for her?
There was, yeah. As soon as I was arrested, I was told the reason I was arrested was for a trade, and it was for the three that I just mentioned, for Yurchenko, Bout, and Butina. Within 3 days of my arrest, Ambassador Antonov in D.C. Went to the State Department and said, hey, look, we've got your guy, you've got three of ours, we want to do a trade. And Mike Pompeo and John Bolton were involved trying to work out a deal. When Krasikov was arrested, that kind of muddied the waters a little bit.
How long after your arrest was
Krasikov? It was later in 2019.
Okay.
So about 6-8 months later.
And he's just for the audience, like his background was, he's got a pretty nefarious background.
Yeah, he's a nasty guy. He was a colonel in the FSB, and he was chasing from Vienna. He was chasing a rebel leader from Chechnya, and Chechnya is a breakaway republic of Russia. They want to be their own country. There have been a few Chechen wars. Anyway, the assassin Krasikov, he follows this rebel leader. They end up in Berlin in a park, broad daylight with women and children all over the place. And Krasikov just goes up to him and shoots him in the head, kills him. He gets caught. He's in prison.
Yeah, and that was an attempt to trade him for you.
Yeah. So the Canadians, the British, the Irish were involved in this. A lot of high-level negotiations and things back and forth. The Germans finally said, okay, the Russians have Navalny, a Russian activist. We want him back, and we'll do this deal. As soon as the Russians said, okay, yeah, you can have Navalny as well as Paul and these, Evan Gershkovich, Wall Street Journal reporter that was also taken. We'll do this deal. A week after they said that they would do the deal, Navalny ended up dead in prison. He was in a secure facility, a high-profile prisoner, and he ends up dead. He's like 46, 47 years old. Obviously, the Russians killed him. They didn't want him out. And they said, okay, well, Navalny's dead. We can still do this deal because we still want Krasikov. But this is the way they do business.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that both countries are out there legitimately arresting spies and people are falling into, the net of espionage activities and whatnot. The Chinese and the Russians, just like the Syrians and Iranians, they go out there looking for people and they grab them and they say, hey, we're going to hold this person arbitrarily. We call it hostage diplomacy now. Yeah. But we're going to hold this person as hostage until you give us what we want. And unfortunately, there's no way you can make the Russians or the Chinese believe anything except their narrative. So in order to get your people back, you have to play along to a certain extent.
Now, eventually, Russia arrests women's basketball star Brittney Griner.
Griner, yeah.
Griner,
Brittney
Griner. I remember when this happened. That the fact that the White House immediately started talking about negotiating a release of her in exchange for this nefarious Russian bad guy. I'm like, well, what about the United States Marine that's there? I knew enough about your story to know that. Why are we talking about just because this lady's a basketball star? Why is this Marine being left out? I mean, when that happened, you're hearing that America's starting to negotiate this release, and you're being left behind. What were you thinking?
It was quite difficult, and don't forget that in April of 2022, before the negotiations for Griner, Trevor Reed, a Marine, had been arrested. He was traded on humanitarian grounds for Yurchenko. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So that had taken place. So the U.S. had 3 people the Russians wanted. Maria Butina was given a light sentence and sent home. So she's out of the picture. There were 2 left. Trevor Reed is traded for Konstantin Yurchenko. So that leaves Victor Bout that the Russians want. And Russia's got Brittney and myself. So the U.S. is saying, well, even though the Russians want Krasikov from Germany, we don't have him. We have Bout. We'll do a 2-for-1. We'll do Paul and Brittney for Victor Bout. And the Russians said, no, we'll trade Paul for Krasikov and we'll trade Victor for Brittney. And the efforts of the U.S. government to dissuade that didn't work, and the trade went through Brittney for Victor. But that was it was a terrible feeling for me because I knew, and it was widely reported that the U.S. had nothing else that the Russians wanted. So the U.S. gave up their bargaining position. It wasn't Brittney's fault necessarily.
Sure.
It wasn't Trevor's fault, that he had gone home first. But I knew that the U.S. had given up their negotiation platform, and the only thing that could be done was to convince the Germans to give up this assassin to get me home. And
they weren't going to do it.
Yeah, they were saying at first they weren't going to do it.
Yeah.
And then when they agreed with Navalny being involved, the Russians killed Navalny. So that put the whole deal in jeopardy. The U.S. went, and the Canadians and British and the Irish involved too, went around Europe speaking to the Norwegians and the Slovenians and the Poles and saying, look, who do you have that's Russian that Russia might want that we can kind of throw in to sweeten the deal? And, it was a joint effort to kind of get a group of people together, as well as Krasikov, to get me out. But in the meantime, after, Brittney went home, Evan Gershkovich, he was arrested. He was a reporter. And, same thing. The Russians just grabbed him, said he was a spy, and held him on political grounds, such as mine, to do a trade.
When this deal fell through and Brittney's went through, do you think that was the environment of a weak leadership in the White House? I mean, for me, like I look at the difference between a President Trump in the White House and a President Biden in the White House, and the position of negotiating power and strength. I believe that with different leadership in the White House, that deal would have been made.
Yeah, the frustrating thing was, that I sat in prison for 2 years with President Trump, and then another 2 years with President Biden, and it was sort of the same thing. The Russians were calling the shots, and they kept changing the goalposts, but apparently we had no leverage, and it was extremely frustrating. Mike Pompeo was very supportive. He was the Secretary of State. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State.
So you were in there both administrations.
Yeah, very supportive. The problem really was that, the guy who takes the hostage calls the shots, and they had the hostages, and they kept stacking the deck.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So let's go back to your arrest. What does that process like? You're arrested, you're being held. I mean, it's got to be a journey from going from handcuffs being put on you, the original interview or interrogation, to court proceedings, to actually being in prison.
Yeah.
Take us through that journey.
It was surreal. Mm-hmm. I'm listening to people speaking a foreign language that I don't understand. I have a translator who, she spoke English well enough for me to understand what she was saying and the process. I was being taken from holding cells to interview rooms to to courts and just going through their process, which isn't entirely different from ours, but there are some notable differences. I couldn't have my own lawyer. I could only have the lawyer that the FSB provided. I couldn't say very much. The statements and things that I thought were important weren't important to the judge. Depending on what the FSB said at the time, it was just taken verbatim, and that's the way it was. At first, the FSB said that my 4 passports were fake. Of course, they weren't. And even later on, when the Russian foreign minister said, "Hey, he does have 4 citizenships. These passports are real," the FSB kept saying, "No, they're fake. They're fake. They're fake," because they would never retract their negative statements. But
what were your passports for?
yeah, I was born in Canada. My parents are from England, and my grandfathers are from Ireland. So I have the citizenships of those 3 countries as well as being naturalized American. And for an immigrant like me, it's not uncommon to have 2 or 3 citizenships. I just happen to have 4. It's a fluke of ancestry.
Yeah.
But it actually helped me in the situation because it meant that I had 4 governments, 4 ambassadors in Moscow that were coming to see me, that were putting pressure on Russia. And all 4 governments were saying, "Hey, look, Russia, you grabbed a tourist. Your story doesn't make sense. We want him back."
Yeah.
And that helped. But I was taken to what we would call an arraignment, which was it was a joke. It was all a sham. I was taken in front of the media. They kept doing the perp walks. I was taken to Lefordova and put in a 9 meter cell. Lefordova, they call it the shooting gallery. It's been around for a long time. And the FSB now and the KGB in the old days would take their prisoners there and they'd do away with the people they didn't want exposed to the media or exposed to courts. The funny thing was that the FSB would set up a perp walk in the corridors of these district courts. Well, that was a perfect opportunity for me to get my message out. So as I walked down the gauntlet, here are all of my consular people, right? Here's the media. Here's everybody that I want to get a message to saying, "Hey, this is bogus. There's nothing to it." Get messages to my family, et cetera, et cetera. And, the Russians apparently didn't realize, the value of what they were doing for me. It wasn't valuable for them. It was valuable for me. But we went back and forth. You would see me going to court for a hearing. Then a month later, I'd go for an appeal hearing. And then I would, be back in court for another hearing and then another appeal hearing. And these were detention hearings. They were basically a sham, letting some credibility to my arrest for the Russians to say, "Look, well, we take this seriously. He's going through this process. Every month or 2, we're evaluating whether he should still be detained or not." But it was all based on this fake case.
If the Russians really believed that you were a spy, the interrogations would have been pretty intense.
Yeah.
What were the interrogations like? How long did they last? What duration of period?
They would actually last for hours. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it would just be sitting in a chair, with silence. Mm-hmm. They tried good cop, bad cop type stuff. They would ask me questions about, the makeup of the Army and go on about the Army. And I said, you guys realize I wasn't in the Army, so I don't know. I really don't. It's not the branch of service I served in, and I have absolutely no idea what to tell you. They didn't really honestly know much about the Marine Corps, and they didn't really know too much about my service other than what they gleaned from the visa applications and what they'd taken off the internet and what the media had been saying. So I had a lot of stupid questions. Their response to my responses wasn't always positive because they thought I was just playing a game with them. And it wasn't until later they figured out that, they were asking me the wrong questions and they didn't know anything about my branch of service and whatnot.
Was it any physical abuse?
No, but, they would do things like come up and kick the chair I was sitting in, or they'd take a water bottle and hit the back of the chair. There was a lot of that kind of stuff. Just stupid things that, when you consider what they're up to, it's like, well, why aren't they hitting me?
Right.
Because they're worried. They knew they couldn't. Mm-hmm. There was too much public attention. One of the funny things they did, they actually took like a slipper and they put it under one of the chair legs of the chair I sat on to make it, off balance. Because if you're sitting in a chair off balance, you might not be paying attention to the questions that are being asked. You're focusing on this chair or whatever. It's an old trick, like the investigator sitting in a chair higher than the person being spoken to. All of those sorts of things they would try. And I just kicked the slipper out of the way. I was like, yeah, good luck. It's not going to work. They went on and on and on for a good year with all this silliness. And finally, they just gave up. They took me to Lubyanka, the old KGB headquarters, the now FSB headquarters. They took me there 6 times, and they sat me down and said, "Look, we need a confession from you. If we have a confession, we can wrap up this court case. Once that's wrapped up, then we can start, negotiating for a trade." And I said, "Well, there's nothing for me to confess. What do you want me to confess to? I'm not a spy. I don't work for the U.S. government. I'm nothing, a general, a secret agent, etc. I'm none of that." And they said, "Well, it doesn't matter. Just put it down on paper. Give us a confession. That's all we need. And then you can go home." This is 2019, in 2020. And I'm like, okay, so I can just go home by confessing to something I didn't do. No, that's not happening. And they said, "Well, why would you want to sit here? You might be here for years. You can go home now." And I said, "Well, I can't go home if that means that I have to, sign a false confession." So they tried that 6 times, and that didn't work. And then, finally, they went through with the sham.
Were you tempted at all? Were your mind like, maybe this is a fast way out? And just wrap it up?
No. Well, number one, I didn't trust anything they told me.
Yeah.
I thought, well, if we could speed the process up, then maybe there would be a negotiation after a conviction, because they wanted a conviction to show credibility.
Sure.
But I wasn't going to sign my name to something that I hadn't done, and I knew I hadn't committed espionage. So probably the funniest thing for us and the not so amused thing for them. It was in September of 2019, and I got in front of the media in court, and I was holding up my signs and everything I would make, and I said, "Russia says they've arrested James Bond on a secret mission, but in reality, they've abducted Mr. Bean on holiday." Well, Mr. Bean on Holiday is a movie, right?
Yeah.
It's funny. There's a little Russian boy named Max in it. Well, everybody on our side of the world laughed at that. Well, the Russians didn't understand it. They had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. Well, when they figured it out, they were really mad. They were really, really mad. And, to the point that they told me so, which is unusual for them. But what they started doing, in my cell at Lefordova, they'd leave bright light on 24 hours a day. And then when I eventually got to the labor camp in Mordovia, for 4 years, every night, every 2 hours, they would come and wake me up and take my photo to show that I hadn't escaped. Although they didn't, hit me during interrogations or use any kind of drugs or, things like that, what they did trying to get back at me was the sleep deprivation. And like I said, it went on for years. And that's been something that I've had to get used to, just being able to sleep properly again.
Yeah, to get woken up every 2 hours
Yeah.
at labor camp. Hey guys, 10 years ago, I had found myself in a position to where investing in Mighty Oaks and all the different things I'm involved in, I had found myself not prepared for retirement. And I went to my friend Ryan Whelan at Allied Wealth. He had been a longtime supporter of Mighty Oaks Foundation. From the beginning, he's one of our first donors to Mighty Oaks, has been a friend for a long time, and I really trusted him. And he has helped me build my retirement and invest in my future through his company, Allied Wealth. He's one of the smartest guys I know when it comes to wealth management, and has taken money that I had stuck away in 401ks that was not really producing and made it produced tenfold. And I'm so happy with the results for me that I asked him to partner with this show, and he is a partner of this show now. And we want to not only let you guys know about Allied Wealth, but we're going to be doing some special episodes on wealth management with Ryan helping co-host them. I say co-host. I'm going to be asking him questions, and we're going to be providing you information on how to best manage your wealth. So if you're like me and you need someone to help you with your retirement, with your investments, with just your overall wealth management, go to alliedwealth.com and meet Ryan and his team to get you set up. What point, when did they actually you were convicted in court?
It was in June 2020.
And so that after that conviction, that's when they transfer you to a prison.
So normally you have 10 days to appeal, and I didn't appeal because the judge had said, hey, look, you're going to be home in 2 weeks. If you start an appeal process, that will slow everything down that people are trying to do. The trial was a sham. We basically went through the different stages what should happen. The judge would ask, "Oh, do you want witnesses?" And I said, "Yes, of course. They've got to come in from other parts of the world. We need visas, et cetera, et cetera." And he said, "Well, because of COVID, you can't have any." Next. Evidence. Do you want to see the evidence? I said, "Yeah, let me see the evidence." He says, "We have boxes of evidence." "Oh, but it's a state secret, so you can't see it." Next. And this is how the trial, played out. And the judge several times said, "Look, this is like the Bolshoi theater. This is like a play. We all have a role, we have a part, and we have to go through these motions." And when I was convicted, he said, "Paul, you're going home in 2 weeks. Don't worry about an appeal." So I said, "Okay," and I waited. It was 45 days that I sat at La Fordova waiting for something to occur, and the governments weren't able to work out an agreement, so they sent me to a labor camp. And that was to put pressure on the U.S. government,
Sure.
to do a trade. And interestingly enough, too, although I'm Canadian, British, and Irish, and those governments tried to negotiate with Russia to get me back, the Russians kept saying, no. We don't want anything from the three of you. We want something from the U.S.
In the United States,
so,
yeah.
Although we'll talk to you, it's the U.S. that's got to pony up.
What was life like in the labor camps in that prison?
So the labor camp, an old Soviet gulag. During the 30s, it was a gulag, a work camp for prisoners. In the 40s, it actually held German prisoners of war, and they left their mark on the camp. I've been to Dachau and I've been to Auschwitz, and it's that same kind of design. It's that 1930s, 1940s design of German camps. That's what the camps in Russia look like. We lived in military barracks, and we worked in a factory. My camp was an international camp, and it was mainly Central Asians from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, as well as some Cubans and some Africans. We had one or two Europeans that came in and out. But for the most part, it was a Central Asian camp, which was interesting. We had a small group of Russians. When the war started with Ukraine, they all went off to the war.
What was that like? I mean, did they know they were being conscripted and pulled? Because I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, so I'm super interested how the prisons got emptied in Russia by Russian prisoners to go fight in Ukraine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have a unique look on the inside of what that would have been like.
Yeah, most of them didn't want to go. They were apolitical. They didn't like Putin. They didn't like his government. They were young kids, early 20s. A lot of them there for minor drug offenses, which here we would, have given them a ticket, a diversion program, maybe rehab, if that. In a lot of situations with like a joint or a couple tablets, the cop will just take it and crush it out with his feet and tell the kids to run away. Right?
Yeah.
Not in Russia. They'll give you 5 years for a joint of marijuana. 5 years in prison, and it's because all of these prisons are labor camps, and this labor fuels the Russian economy. It fuels the people in charge.
Now it's fueling their military.
Yeah, it's fueling their military. And in my camp, we were making military clothing, as well as combat netting. But when the Russians left for the war, they didn't want to go to the war. They wanted to go home, and they were being promised that if they did 6 months service, they would be paid, they'd get a pardon, and then they could go home. Well, the reality was that they went home without a hand, they went home without a foot. They went home with, an ear missing. They went home with a lot of psychological damage. Some of them didn't get home at all.
I'll say or never, yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the practice of a penal battalion goes back to the Soviet days, to World War II. These penal battalions, the battalions made up of former prisoners, were sent to clear minefields. They were sent out in front of other infantry units to draw the enemy fire. And they're just meat. It was a slaughterhouse. And we had burner phones in the camp, and so did these guys that went off to the war. And they would send pictures back and tell us what was happening. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have clothes. They didn't have food. And it was unbelievable. Yeah. It's not the sort of thing that we would have ever considered, even in the difficult wars that we fought. We just would never have done that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've been to Ukraine 10 times and during the war, and one of my latter trips was a pretty kinetic combat. Most of the Russians that were killed, I've seen several hundred Russian soldiers that were killed. They were kids.
Yeah,
and the equipment they had was,
It's vintage.
it was. I mean, from the war in the 40s, like in the 40s and 50s.
Well, they have what's called Valenki, which are like felt boots, and they use duct tape to duct tape the top to keep the snow out. Well, that's fine if you're a peasant in the 1920s.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. One of the problems with Putin is that they have a Victory Day parade every year in Russia, right? It goes through Red Square, and you've got missiles and tanks, and you've got all these soldiers that are marching. And actually, the soldiers that you see marching aren't soldiers. They're cadets from all the different service academies in Moscow area. But they put on a good parade. But that's a World War II parade. It's focused on the victory over the Nazis, the fascists, right? Well, younger kids, they don't have any connection to that war. Their grandparents have passed away. Their parents may have been small children, probably not. And so the war that they would recognize is the Afghan war. But because the Russians lost that's hidden. That's hushed up. Nobody speaks about the Afghan war in Russia. So you've got a parade every year for a victory that the young kids don't even understand. So what's Putin doing? Putin is setting up the next parade. It's going to be the victory in Ukraine parade. And he's sending all of these generations, these young kids, to the slaughter just for the sake of this parade. And so that he can be like Stalin, saying that he overthrew NATO and overthrew the fascists and all this kind of nonsense. It's the same sort of thing. And you know this from being there. The Russian story, their narrative, is that the Ukrainians are fascists, just like the Germans were fascists.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable.
A lot of propaganda.
Yeah,
floating around the world that people unfortunately believe the Nazis, Nazism of Ukraine.
And in Russia, it's a crime to speak out against what Putin's doing. So if you say, "Oh, this is an unjust war, this is an illegal war," you go to prison for that in Russia, and from prison you'll be expected to then go and fight the war.
Yes,
it's a crazy system,
which is fascist.
Yeah, that is fascist.
So you're talking about this international camp with all these people from different cultures. What was life like there? Working there? What were the guards like? It was more a prison environment, or was it more just like a camp, like work camp environment?
So there were three sections of the camp. There was the administrative section where the guards were, as well as the perimeter. The barracks were run by prisoners, and the factory was run by prisoners. Those were the two other sections. Run sort of like the German concentration camps, where the administration would put a prisoner in charge. So you had prisoners working for the administration who were in charge in the barracks and in charge of the different areas in the factory. Then you have the Russian mafia. It's basically the prisoners. And the prisoners would say, okay, fine, administration, if you're going to have, we would call a red prisoner in charge of the barrack, we're going to have a black prisoner in charge of the barrack also. And the same for the factory. So you had this duality of a prisoner controlled by the guards and a prisoner who was basically, keeping track of things for the Russian mafia inside the prison. Corruption, uncontrollable. The guards, they don't make much. So the currency of the camp was cigarettes, and we would have money put into our prison accounts, what they call commissary here, and we would buy a lot of cigarettes, and then the guards would go and buy real food, fruits, vegetables, things like that for us, as well as burner phones and whatever else we needed. They would bring the stuff in, we'd trade for cigarettes, and there was an economy. The funny thing was that one guard would bring a phone in, and then another guard would try to find that phone to take it. And there were all these games and shenanigans going on.
What about food? You said you're talking about bordering food. What was the...
Oh, the food they provided was horrible. In the old days, the Russians would provide bread and tea. And any other food family members would have to send in. So in the 20s and 30s and whatnot, even in the 50s, 60s, the families of the prisoners would move around the prison camp to be able to provide their loved one with food and whatnot. Well, we had the same bread and the same tea. Tea being the only beverage they ever served. We would have like a wheat, cabbage, potato, onion soup for lunch, and then they would give us fish for dinner. A little piece of fish. I forgot the name of it, but it's a fish that only the Russians eat. People in Europe use it for fertilizer. And it was horrible. Even the cats in the camp wouldn't eat this stuff. It was horrible. So we had to have food come in, and if you wanted to have a healthy, nutritious diet, you could buy some things at the commissary, but not very much. My consulates would bring food parcels when they came to visit, and then we would have things coming in from the guards.
Yeah, what was the accommodations as far as Russia's obviously cold in the winter. I mean, are they clothing you appropriately, or you're having you're huddling around a fire? Like, what's that life like?
The fact that I'm from Canada and I live in Michigan, and I went to Russia in December, meant that I was used to the cold and I had a lot of warm clothes with me.
Okay.
So like my long underwear and long sleeve shirts and all these kinds of things, I was able to keep with me, and my family sent tons of stuff in too. But the factory I was in, we made clothing. We made winter coats and winter trousers, insulated clothing. We ended up having to make things for the Russian military, but basically what we made, coats and things for airport runway workers, railway workers, postal workers, things like that. So we were able to use black material and make our own, coats, make our own, fur hats, our own uniforms and things. So we would have insulated trousers, and we'd have insulated shirts, and then we'd have, these just huge, like Yukon type Alaska coats to keep warm. There was no heat in the barracks. They didn't heat the barracks. So, we were wrapped up 24 hours a day. We could make like blanket comforter type things with all this insulation. It's called Centipon, which I'll get to, but it caused a bit of a problem. But we would like make just a thick blanket to sleep under. And
but I'm certain you guys had hot water.
No hot water. No, the only hot water we had was hot water that we boiled.
Yeah, so you had a cold plunge shower every day.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, just
Wow. I guess my last question about like lifestyle there would be the violence. Was there prisoner like violence on one another?
Not really. It was a camp with mainly young people, and every once in a while emotions would get hot. Maybe somebody stole some food or somebody did something to offend somebody else. But because of the traditions, the tribal traditions of the Central Asians, they didn't take matters into their own hands, and we didn't have stabbings and fighting and all this kind of stuff. What you'd see is like a tribal council, where the elders would sit down, and the elders in these cases might be 27 to 30, right?
Right.
But they'd sit down and be like, okay, Junior, what did you do? And he'd explain it, and then they would come up with a punishment. Sometimes it would be they just wouldn't let him use a phone to call his family for a month. Sometimes it wasn't a beating, but what they do is with an open hand, you'd get 5 or 6 guys slapping, the offender in the face. He'd end up with a bit of a bruise, not quite a black eye, but he'd have a bit of a bruise, and people would know, hey, he did something wrong, and he was sanctioned for it. But there were no stabbings. There was nothing like that. I was actually punched by a Turkish guy that was just a bit younger than me because he didn't like the U.S. support of Israel early on in their war. But other than that, I didn't have any even thoughts of violence. It was a very peaceful camp, although you had a lot of negative energy from people sometimes. We did have a couple of brawls. Some Russians from Dagestan came in. They're Muslim, and the way that they thought business should be done, as far as like the mafioso type stuff, was a little bit different than the Tajiks, who are also Muslim. For whatever reason, those two groups don't get along in terms of Islam, and I'm not 100% sure why. But they had a big brawl, and it was between them. It was nothing that I would have gotten involved with. And we thought the matter was settled, right? Well, then the next day they had another brawl. And this was, they were in barracks just tearing things up, breaking windows, breaking furniture, just tearing things up both times. And then finally the elders had to kind of like sit everybody down and say, look, you can't just tear places apart. But those were the only two occurrences. And like I said, it was an Islamic thing. It was between the Muslims. They sorted it out between themselves, and it didn't impact me. We had another issue where actually two Ukrainians were injured just by chance, but one of the guards had taken a Quran and a prayer rug and threw them away. The garbage went to a fire pit. They were thrown on the fire pit. One of the Tajik prisoners who was working at the fire pit saw these things, got mad. All the Muslim prisoners walked out of the factory. There's good 500 of them, refused to work, and they just got riled up. And these two guys, they were Ukrainian, just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the emotions caught up with some of the prisoners, and they attacked these two. They didn't really hurt them very badly, just kind of slapped them around and whatnot. But other than those instances, there really wasn't violence in the camp.
Through this process, this 5-year process, at what point did you? And I know we're kind of going back and forth, but I'm just kind of interested in the layers of this thing. At what point did you start speaking to your representative at the U.S. State Department? Was it early on?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So December 28th, 2018, I was arrested, and January 2nd, John Huntsman, the ambassador, he was there at La Fortiva to talk to me.
So you were allowed to speak to him?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the Canadians turned up shortly after, then the Irish and the British. And basically every week at La Fortiva, I would have a consular meeting. We'd have to skip every once in a while. If the Russians weren't happy, they would cancel at the last minute or something, their usual games. But I had regular access. And at the labor camp, the ambassadors and consular teams would make the 10-hour drive out to Mordovia. Sometimes it took 2 or 3 days for them to get there and go back for basically what was a 4-hour meeting. I had phone calls, 3 45-minute phone calls with Secretary Blinken from the prison. I spoke regularly to Ambassador Carstens, the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs, who was in charge of my case. And I spoke to Debbie Dingell from prison. She's one of my congresswomen. I spoke to the media, other members of the different governments, the Canadians and the British. So by hook or by crook, I had communication that I'm sure the Russians, they thought, well, this could be beneficial for us because it might help resolve the situation. But I'm sure they didn't like the fact that I had this access with, burner phones and all kinds of surreptitious things going on.
Even with communicating with the Department of State, with your representatives, was there ever a moment where you thought, I'm never going to be released? Like there's no end to this.
No.
I'm going to be stuck here forever.
No. I knew that the U.S. government was going to come after me. The Canadians, the British, the Irish were trying. The Russians wanted something from the Americans, and I had promises from the U.S. government that they were coming for me.
Okay.
The State Department was promising. The National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, was promising. There were others in the U.S. government promising, and they said, "Look, this is just taking time. You need to be patient." And I'm a fairly patient person, but, at the 5-year mark, I was just like, WTF? What are you guys doing? I mean, how long does it take to work out a deal? One person's here 3 years, one's here 10 months. I'm here 5 years. What are you guys up to?
But you never lost hope. You're always like, this is going to happen.
This is going to happen. And, there are some stories in the media. One of my friends from the camp wrote a story that's out there. In it, there's a funny exchange because people would always ask me, when you're going home, when are you going home? And my answer was always soon. I'd say it in Russian, soon. And that was from day one at the camp. When are you going home, Paul? Soon. And, it was kind of a bit of a joke because they were like, well, when is it? And I said, well, soon. It's a relative term.
Yeah.
But I never gave up hope that the U.S. government was going to come for me. They don't leave people behind. They do what they can to bring people back and try to take care of them. It doesn't always work the way we would like it to as quickly as we would. But they gave me a promise early on, and that promise went from one administration to the next administration, and they came through. I don't agree with everybody's politics, but I can tell you that the U.S. Congress, the House and the Senate, they came together, and with a bipartisan effort, they put pressure on the presidents, on the administrations, both of them, and did what they could to take care of me and my family and to get me home. And that's an important part because in the 5.5 years that I was held, I don't know of anything else the Congress did on a bipartisan basis except get me home.
I was going to say, that's really encouraging to know that there was something that there was a bipartisan in the House. And look, I'll say right here to everybody listening, like I've been very hard on Secretary Blinken publicly because of Afghanistan. the withdrawal. And there's been four other instances in this administration, this current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, where we've left Americans behind, where we've closed embassies, consulates, and moved military out and left Americans behind. So I've been pretty publicly hard on Secretary Blinken but you have said that he did the right thing for you. And I appreciate hearing that.
He did the right thing for me. And I can tell you that, during his entire tenure, he was in contact with me and my family, providing what information he could and reassurances that he could. The first phone call I had when I got off the Russian plane in Ankara, Turkey, was with him. And he was on the other side of the world, but it was important enough for him to have that call. World leaders can't get 5 minutes with him. They can't get a 10-minute phone call. And he took the time, which, obviously cut into his personal life, to have these 45-minute calls with me from around the world while I was in prison. So, yeah, I don't say that everything either administration did was perfect, but I can tell you that Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Roger Carstens, they took my case and they said, look, Paul, you're coming home. So just hang tough and, we're coming for you. And they did.
Ultimately, in the end, what was the transaction? What was the thing that sealed the deal to get you home?
For everything that we're told and everything that we see, there's more to it. Mm-hmm. There are things that happen under the table, and nobody will ever tell me about the under the table deals. But what it took to get me home was the Germans agreeing to let Krasikov go. And when the Germans agreed to let Krasikov go, the logistics were worked out, and that's when Evan and I were free to leave. The British, the Canadians, the Irish were speaking to the Germans, trying to get some cooperation. The Germans had said, yeah, we'll let Krasikov go if we can have Navalny. After he was murdered by the Russians, the whole negotiation was in jeopardy. But my four countries worked together and they came through. One of the saving graces, and I hate to say this, was that Krasikov, a Russian, he killed a Chechen, which is a Russian citizen, and the Germans said, okay, well, he didn't kill a German, so at least that's something we can work with. And the German government decided to not let bygones be bygones, but kind of let this one go for the sake of innocent people being released and going home. And
yeah,
I think there were 8 or 9 German Russian citizens, dual citizens, that were held in Russia that were also part of the transaction. Kara-Murza, he's a British Russian activist. He was released. There was a young kid, Kevin, and he was like 18, and he was Russian-German, and the Russians arrested him and said he was committing treason. He was just a kid, He was part of our deal. So, but it was really, when you looked at it, it was Evan and myself for Krasikov. Those were the major players. That's what everybody was after.
What's it feel like, and what did it feel like? What's it feel like to know, like, you're traded for this Krasikov, this assassin, this kind of international criminal? Knowing,
yeah, he's an assassin.
Yeah.
Yeah. On one side, I knew that the Russians had to get him back, or none of their other assassins would go out and do the job if they knew that they'd be left behind. Nobody would. Who would want to do that, right? On the other hand, necessary compromise to serve a greater good. The U.S. government, my governments, needed to show that if you're innocent, if you're a tourist, that they will come for you and they will, defend your rights if you're innocent, and they'll get you home.
So you see it as bigger than just you.
It's bigger than just me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a statement that the United States government, by the way, I believe needs to make.
Yeah. Well, and it's important to understand, too, that there are American citizens held around the world who have committed crimes in foreign countries, and the State Department can't get them back. They're not considered political prisoners, and the State Department cannot get them back. However, the Department of Justice can. There's an international prisoner transfer treaty, and we're a signatory to it. Russia is, China, these other countries. And what it allows is for our citizens held in foreign prisons to come back to the United States and serve sentences here commensurate to our federal sentencing guidelines.
Right.
And actually, the president has the ability to commute those sentences and pardon those sentences. So there is an opportunity for all of the American citizens held in foreign countries that aren't political cases like Brittney and Evan and Trevor and I to come back to the U.S. The U.S. to stay, but the Justice Department isn't doing anything with those cases. Every once in a while they'll take an easy one and bring somebody back, but for the most part, the DOJ doesn't do anything to get our citizens back, and that's who I would point a finger at. I mean, the State Department's doing a lot to get people home, and the DOJ, nobody really understands that they own this treaty and that they just ignore it.
Right.
I mean, there's like 25 Americans that are locked up in Russia right now, and the Justice Department from 2018 when I was locked up hasn't done anything to get any of those people transferred home. So, I mean, that's an area to look at, because that is something that the Attorney General could do something with. And I mean, the DOJ has an office set up to handle it. But, they look at easy cases like, an American went over to Canada and got himself in trouble, and we can get him back easily. Oh, okay, somebody went to Mexico. Yeah, we can get them back easily. But the hard cases, the hard transfers,
Russia, China,
those deals, they don't even look at them, and they should. They really should.
Regardless of a crime, if they're American citizen.
Bring them home.
Still an American citizen.
Bring them home.
Do you remember? And I'm sure you do. First getting the news, I'm going home, and who communicated that to you?
It was kind of a funny situation because I had knowledge of negotiations taking place, and I had a feeling that something would happen. I spoke to some people in the government, and they said, okay, well, be ready. And this had happened before, that I'd spoken to people and they'd said, be ready, something could occur, and I'd been let down. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking, okay, I know negotiations are taking place. I'm being told to be ready, but, there might not be anything to it.
Yeah, I've been doing this game for 5 years now.
Yeah. So in July of 2024, we had that kind of same scenario. And I called my parents and I said, hey, look, there's an opportunity that something might occur if you don't hear from me for a couple of days. That could be a good thing rather than a bad thing. Stay in touch with the consulates. They'll be able to check on me and what have you. The next day, the FSB came to the prison and they said, hey, get your stuff together that you want to take with you. You're going to the hospital. And I said, oh, really? I'm going to the hospital and you guys came to get me? Because the hospital camp was another camp, just like the one I was in, just down the road. So if you went to the hospital, they'd just take you in a van. The FSB wouldn't come to get you. I said, come on, you've got all these, high-ranking people here making sure, that from the prosecutor's office to prison service and the FSB, that you're not screwing something up. So you're not taking me to the hospital. So am I going back to La Fortiva? And the guy looked at me and he kind of like nodded just briefly. I said, okay. So I took my stuff, clothing, food, gear, medications, all these things, and I basically, distributed them to my friends and said, hey, look, you guys take this stuff. If I'm not back in 5 days, then keep it, right?
Yeah.
I put my bag together. I had mail, I had, clothing and whatever. And, off we go. Well, obviously I got in an FSB van and we drove back to Moscow, and I went to La Fortiva. So I was pretty sure something was happening at that point. So this would have been late July. When I got to La Fortiva, mostly the same guards that I dealt with prior to, and they were, whenever they saw me, they'd kind of smile a little bit, and they'd always go like this. And, to us, this means rally, right? Rally round. To Russians, this means be careful because somebody's listening. There are listening devices, maybe cameras. So they'd always go like that and, put their finger over their lips and say, hey, be quiet. And they would quietly say, you're here because you're leaving soon. They'd tell me, hey, there's another American here, a young guy. Well, that was Evan. They put me in solitary confinement. And I was there for 5 days, and then I couldn't even leave to exercise or do anything at all. They brought food to me, but they came on August 1st, and they had a bag of my clothing that hadn't been washed in years, and they said, "Put some stuff on. You're going. You're leaving." And so I knew that I was going home. I got onto a bus out in the courtyard with some other prisoners. Evan was there. Alsu, I always pronounce her name wrong. It's Kurmasheva. She was a Russian-American journalist for Voice of America who'd been arrested, similarly to Evan. She was there. I recognized them. We were taken on a bus to a plane at a Moscow airport, like the foreign ministry plane. Each one of us had an FSB minder with us, wearing the masks and everything, all geared up. We got on a plane and they never actually told us, you're going to Turkey, you're going to be exchanged, you're pardoned, nothing. They just basically got our gear, they put us on a plane and they took us to Turkey and got us off the plane and left with their people. I mean, it was an odd situation. I'd kind of thought maybe they'd take us to court. A judge would say, you're pardoned or your case is dismissed or whatever. Here's some documents. They didn't do anything like that at all.
Was there a point to where you knew like this is over? Was it not till you got to Turkey
Well,
I mean, because there's got to be a point to where you're like, it doesn't feel like it's quite going to happen. It's always still a chance, and then you're like, okay, this is done. I'm free.
So in Turkey, and I have to keep some of this back because there are agencies that don't want me to discuss too much, and I'm also trying to write a book. But in Turkey, suffice to say, the CIA was running the show, and the CIA had brought in the Russian prisoners from the other countries. They were helping with this exchange. I got on a CIA plane to come back. Evan and Alsu were with me. The other prisoners went to in different planes to different countries.
This is the Russian prisoners that we exchanged.
Yeah. Those guys went to other countries. Alsu, Evan, and I were in CIA plane coming back to the States. And I thought, okay, well, I'm surrounded by air marshals and CIA and State Department people. I'm in good hands. It's a CIA plane. But, we're still flying over Turkey, which is an ally of ours, even though they're not. Yeah. We're still flying over areas that, could have, bad actors, right? So, I'm just kind of a little bit wary. But there was a tracker, like a GPS tracker, that showed our route, on a screen. So I was watching it. And when we got to France, I said, well, I'm looking out the window. I can see the ground. It's a small plane. We're not that high up. I can see the ground. And we're crossing Dover. And, I looked out and I saw the White Cliffs of Dover. So I knew I was back in friendly territory.
Yeah.
So.
Does that when a wave of emotion hit?
Yeah, and it still does. It still does. During the war, the White Cliffs, which are very, very prevalent, guided the Spitfires home.
Yeah.
And so, having been away for so long, seeing something like that I actually recognized.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a big deal. So at that point, I knew that I was free.
Who's the first person you called?
My parents.
Yeah. What was their reaction like?
The State Department had warned them that something was happening.
Yeah. And
I had just had a phone call with Secretary Blinken. And so I said, I think my mother answered the phone. I was like, hey, get Dad on the phone too. And, he picked up and I said, I'm in Turkey. And they I think for a second had to process that. And I said, I'm in Turkey. It's going to be on the news. We've been released. And so they said, well, we had a phone call from the State Department. We weren't sure that this was going to, be the release or not. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And they said they had, like on one TV, they had CNN, another one they had Fox. And, they had radios listening, to see who was the first to report, what was going on. But, yeah. I had a call with them. We got on the plane. When I got back to Texas, I started calling all my friends, and they were calling in. Congressional people were calling in. I had the issue of sleep deprivation, right? So I wasn't sleeping well. We'd just gone 10 time zones, and I was up at all hours calling people and doing all sorts of stuff. And it was really, it was kind of a wild couple of days after we did the initial in-brief.
Yeah, no one waking you up every 2 hours.
No, and just eating whatever you wanted to. And, unfortunately, I came back thin, probably malnourished, but I've been eating really well and I've put on a lot of weight. So now I've got to get rid of it.
Enjoy it. Yeah. Look, this show, the Resilient Show, And the topic of resiliency we break down into 4 pillars: mind, body, spirit, and social. We have the mental resilience, the physical health and resilience.
Yeah.
Socially, who you're surrounded with, and then the spiritual resilience that we have. I'm sure there's probably different phases throughout this 5 years that you've had to experience all of those. You're making sure you're healthy, making sure your mind stays in the right place. I love the fact that you never lost hope. You knew you were coming home. Socially, you had access to your family and an encouragement of your family. I'm very curious if faith was a factor for you. I haven't asked you what your faith is, and was faith a factor for you through this?
It was. Yeah, it was. There are no atheists in foxholes, and there are no atheists in Russian labor camps.
Yeah.
You have to hold dear to whatever you believe in, whatever your faith is, and however that manifests, and just trust that you're being taken care of. In a country like Russia, where they have the Russian Orthodox Church, and apparently it's supposed to be Christian, you have to wonder why other Christians are treating you badly as a Christian yourself.
You're a Christian.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
But you have to get over that.
Yeah.
You have to get over that, and yeah, it's difficult though. It's difficult because you're thinking, well, why me?
Sure.
Why am I not being taken care of? When's he going to get to me?
Yeah.
And he does eventually, but. The trials and tribulations, maybe patience, maybe other things, those are all part of it.
Did you have access to a Bible while you were there?
That's an interesting piece. The Russians would never let me have a Bible because they said it was too difficult for them to censor. There was too much in it. And I said, well, that's ridiculous.
The Muslims had Qurans?
They did. Yeah, in Arabic. Yeah, but I couldn't have an English Bible.
Wow.
Not even.
What do you think that means when it's too difficult for them to censor?
It's a lie because they censored all sorts of other books.
Right.
I had a lot of English books, and they censored all sorts of things. They didn't want me to have a Bible because they're, godless communists.
Yeah.
To be quite honest,
yeah.
They still believe in all the old communist, socialist nonsense, and they're godless.
What's so funny that when we look at the spectrum of religions, the most persecuted is the Christian faith, and as something. There's a deliberateness to, when you allow the Quran, you allow these other religious books to be in a place like that. But something about the gospel and the message of Jesus, there's a censorship towards it. And you see it around the world. In fact, I think 75% of the world has a religious persecution against Christianity. We fortunately live in part of the 25% of the world that doesn't.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, very interesting. The reason I asked that is because there's so many stories in the Bibles of people of faith who were imprisoned for long periods of time. Yeah, Paul and Joseph, and some of their greatest, the greatest messages of their story come out of their time in incarceration.
Yeah. Now, I remembered a lot of those stories, and friends would write in. I got a lot of mail. I mean, I had thousands of letters coming in, and actually there are thousands sitting at the consulate in Moscow that are making their way to me now. But a lot of religious references and quotes and whatnot. People knowing that I didn't have a Bible or religious literature, so people were sending things in to me, and one of the things that I chuckle about is St. Paul and the letters he wrote from prison and whatnot. Yeah. And I wrote a lot of letters from prison, and not that I would equate myself with him at all, but we would kind of make light of some of that sort of thing, and it got to be that in our letters we would speak about the letters that he wrote or that he was in prison, and we would use this verbiage which we understood between us, but the Russians, they didn't, so they couldn't censor these letters coming in. But from Manchester, Michigan, where I live, the churches there, extremely supportive. Churches all over the country, praying for me, praying for my family, just doing all sorts of nice things for me and my family. Yeah, it's quite encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of take it to a close with coming home. You come home. What's that process like? I mean, obviously the plan doesn't land and you catch your first Uber home to your house. What's it like? Who was waiting for you? What was the government process? Did they want to make sure you were healthy? Did they want to make sure you were, got a good after action debriefing.
Yeah.
Tons of stuff had to happen.
Yeah, a ton.
Yeah.
So in the camp, we had centipon as an insulator, and it had to be cut. The problem with centipon is it leaves a fiber, sort of like asbestos.
Okay.
And it's in the air, and we're breathing it. It gets all over clothing and everything else. Even using a mask doesn't really help. So you would have a cough, and we called it centipon cough. And I had it. And so for years, I was coughing.
The whole camp is probably coughing all the time.
The whole camp had it. And people smoke cigarettes, and tuberculosis is very, very common in these camps, and people die of tuberculosis all the time there. There's all sorts of diseases and things I won't go into, but it's all there and it's untreated because there's no medical care in these camps. The U.S. government obviously wanted to make sure that I didn't bring something home that was making me ill, or bring something home that would then make my elderly parents ill, or friends and other family. So I went to Brooke Army Medical Center for 2 days. I think I had every test known to man in a very, very short period. I saw all sorts of doctors and specialists and people. Saw the chaplain there. They did everything that you could imagine. It's a post-isolation support activity. We call it PISA. But they went through everything, and they did MRIs and all sorts of other things. I was kind of awake for 2 days doing all of this. But they got it done very, very efficiently, very, very quickly. And then I went to Fort Sam Houston next door. They have a special area, for the returnees. My family came in, friends came in, Marines that I'd known, things like that. And we would speak to the SEER psychologists, the guys and ladies that are trained in dealing with, post-traumatic stress disorder, post-isolation type disorders. And we would, we went through what I went through. They wanted to know how I was treated, how I felt, what my favorite color was, all that kind of stuff. And in boot camp in the Marines, we'd always joke about the wizard. Oh, you had to go and see the wizard, ha, ha, ha. But these guys, these psychologists, they're really good. They understand, what a prisoner goes through. They understand what a hostage goes through. They're there to listen. They have a lot of good information, and they were very supportive. They still are today. I'm still in touch with them. I had a visit from the commanding general of Southern Command. She's a 4-star general, and unfortunately I forget her name, but she gave me her coin, and her and her whole team were basically just there to check on me. And they spoke with my family, all pretense and ranks and things aside. We just chatted very openly, but they were there to make sure that I had the support that I needed. My family had the support. The guys from Army South were there taking care of me. Generals and colonels would just kind of like turn up, walking their dog, and we'd sit and smoke a cigar and just chat about things. And that's that's the way they dealt with me. It was really kind of bizarre at first, but there was a lot of top level support. The Army South guys, the dentists, the doctors, physician assistants, all of these people came together to provide the care that I needed there.
It had to be things you had to start over, like driver's license, all that stuff. And they the kind of reintegration of all that stuff.
Well, I had Debbie Dingle. She's one of my congresswomen, and Haley Stevens, another one. They were kind of like, hey, what do you need? Just tell us what you need. And I had members of Congress that were calling, and the switchboard was like saying, oh, no, there's no Paul Whelan here, go away. And they're like, no, I'm a member of Congress, let me through. So finally we set up comms, and I was able to speak to the congressional representatives, and I said, well, I need professional licenses renewed. I need concealed weapon license renewed. I need my driver's license. And Debbie said, okay, you just tell us what you need done, and we'll do it. And then Haley said, federal government type stuff, global entry, passports, all of these things. What can we help shepherd through? And I said, hey, I need my global entry. I need to make sure my passports are valid. I need to make sure that these things are in place. She said, consider it done. So those two especially did a lot. Elisa Slotkin, John Molinar, the other members of the Michigan delegation. They all welcomed me back to D.C. when I got there. But in Texas, they were all on the phone and they were all wondering, hey, what can we do? And it wasn't Democrats, it wasn't Republicans, it was all of them together, the Michigan delegation, as well as congressmen, senators, and whatnot from other states. They were calling to congratulate me, and they always said the same thing: what can we do? What do you need done? Tell us.
Yeah,
and they did. They helped by smoothing the way through like the Michigan government, through the federal. Now there are some problems, like I don't qualify for unemployment and I don't qualify for medical benefits. There are things that you would think would be there as a safety net for a hostage coming back, but because of state and federal laws, hostages don't qualify. So those same Congress members are writing bills and they're working with their counterparts to address all that sort of thing.
So I have to ask because I spent most of my years in special operations and a lot of intelligence community. And if somebody like you comes back, like I want to
debriefing.
I want a debriefing. I want after action. I want to know what you saw that we could improve our intelligence for future. I want to know about Russia. How many debriefings did you have to go to? Were multiple federal agencies? I mean, they had to be intelligence agencies that want to know about what you saw and experienced.
Well, one of the things the federal government's worked on for a long time is bringing all of these law enforcement intelligence agencies together so they can share information and whatnot. And I have to tell you, they've got a long way to go.
I was gonna say that too. I'm like, they are not there, man. It's one of the biggest.
That's one of the biggest issues. So, I was open and honest with all of them, and I sat down with all of them, and I spoke to more than half a dozen. But I had to do it separately. And I wish we could have just brought everybody together in a room and had a discussion, but they don't work that way. And they explained why they don't. And I get it, but there should be a mechanism to bring them together. But from the top, all the national security and intelligence people had an interest, and they had specific questions. They had areas of interest. They wanted to know even about the Central Asians that were in my labor camp for drugs, how they were taking, drugs from Afghanistan, Tajikistan into Russia, how that operated. They wanted to know about other prisoners. They wanted to know about how the Russians do things, how they don't do things, the state of the prisons and courts and what have you. So a lot of interesting questions. And, like I said, I was open and honest with everyone. And part of what I've tried to do with Congress and with the government is provide all the information that I can and try to make the experience better for the next person that comes back.
Yeah.
And, hopefully that, we can reduce the number of people that end up in that same situation, but making sure that when they get home, there are unemployment benefits, there are medical benefits, there are these things that are actually written into law, but they're not funded is the problem. That these kinds of benefits are just there ready and waiting. And then when they do a debrief where they have to see somebody, it's an easy process. It's a more friendly process than, what it sometimes can be.
Was there any piece of intelligence that you could share that you were able to give to one of these agencies that you think makes us more like equipped as a nation, makes our national security interests?
Well, one of the things I did, and this was difficult for me, and I had to weigh this in my mind. When I was in the labor camp, friends of mine went off to war, right? Mm-hmm. They were
to Ukraine war.
Yeah, they went to the war in Ukraine. They were reporting back to us, using their burner phones about, where they were, what they had, what they didn't have, the conditions and whatever. And I had a dilemma because I knew that was intelligence, and I knew it was actionable. And, do I sit on it, or do I give it to our people who could then use it or share it with Ukraine or what have you? So I made the decision to send all of that information back to our people.
While you're in camp?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
some might call that spying.
Well, I don't even convicted for it.
On the good side, I'm on your team. But
what the heck?
I'm saying that was, man.
It could have been problematic.
It could have been problematic. Yeah. So that was brave of you to do that.
Yeah. Thanks. I couldn't sit on it because it might have helped save the lives of some Ukrainian soldiers. And Trevor Reed went over to Ukraine. I didn't know this at the time, but Trevor was fighting the Ukrainians while I was still locked up. I didn't know what impact it could have, but I knew I couldn't sit on it, and it was something that I had to think carefully, and that's where faith comes in. I had to think carefully about what I was going to do because while I was giving that information to our people, it could have been costing some of these young Russians that I knew their lives.
Yeah.
I didn't know, but I thought,
That's real honorable. You did that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I thought it could help, so I did it. I provided all of the information I could to our people about how the Russians operate, how they do things, how they surveil people, what problems they have, the state of their equipment and their facilities and whatnot, and then just some of the stories and things that they told me, and then information I garnered from the prisoners in the camp. The state of the Russian intelligence services is pretty poor. Mm-hmm. The FSB, the SVR, their counterintelligence, it's really poor. Yeah. They've got a special unit that's just set up to go after foreigners, to hold them for hostage issues. Evan Gershkovich just did a good article in the Wall Street Journal about this.
So you're saying that there's an office within the
FSB.
The FSB
that's been stood up to just take foreigners hostage for these sorts of trades.
The exact same thing you went through.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good article.
Yeah. Where can you find that again?
Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
It's online. I'll make sure you have a copy of it.
Yeah.
The GRU, their military intelligence, doesn't like the FSB, and they fight. And this is one of the things that Putin does. He pits his people against each other. So instead of having all these people like working together and having a decent budget and whatever, he splits them up and then makes sure that they fight. And that's how he keeps control.
They're constantly trying to gain favor with him.
Yeah. So when you see that sort of behavior from like intelligence agencies, you know that they're not doing what they should be doing because they're trying to protect their turf. They're not garnering intelligence from around the world.
Yeah. So many good nuggets of information that our intelligence agencies get from you for something like training. Like I've been to SEER, I've been high risk SEER, I've been to corporate cover like SEER training, like all these SEER. For those who don't know, SEER is survival, escape, resistance, evasion. It's basically POW or training, right? So like a lot of the classes we get are from, and we're learning about interrogation tactics that come from real life scenarios that like you've been through, and those debriefings are so important to be able to help prepare us for that training, prepare us for future encounters like that. So so that's I was super interested in that aspect of it. Obviously, with the grace of God, you'll never go through this again, but you have a life ahead of you. Like, how do you think all this experience has changed you for just everyday life you're going to have moving forward?
There are things that I brought back from the camp that I still use to this day. There's some clothing. There's a cup that I used. My family sent it in. I used it almost the whole time. I brought that back. I still use it. There are some other things that have meaning. Every day from day one, I sung the national anthems of my 4 countries out loud. And in the camp, some of the Tajiks and Uzbeks would sing, with me with their anthems. There are things that I started doing, and I did them because I was in isolation, and I still do them now, and I will in the future. Why not sing the national anthems, right?
Yeah.
It's like the Pledge of Allegiance. Why not say it? So I do. So those have had an impact. Understanding, my faith, understanding what I believe in, and why it's important is something that I'll carry with me too, and that'll help shape me instead of knowing about it and just kind of brushing it off because things are busy, but paying more attention to it. I want to do more to help my fellow man. I've always had kind of a caretaker personality. People like you and me, in law enforcement, in the military, we're doing that sort of thing just naturally. But I want to make sure that we can reduce the number of hostages being taken, and then that we're doing more to support the hostages while they're held. We're doing more to support their families. And then when the person comes home, it's not just walk off the plane and, see you later. It's, okay, for the next 5 years, as the law says, how can we support you? Medical care, dental care, optical care, compensation, the psychological, help, finding employment, finding housing. All of these things that, unfortunately, the government provides to other people that may not be as worthy as the hostages coming home. the sorts of things that the hostages need, making sure that they're provided with that. So there's some advocacy that I'm doing with government agencies and Congress and whatnot to make sure that that same level of support that's given to other people is given to returned hostages. And I think now it's a bit of a calling.
Yeah.
I mean, why did this happen to me if I wasn't meant to now stand up
to do something
and,
with it
and do something with it?
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I think some of the greatest nonprofits or just causes come from people, like when I say causes, like movements have come from people who have experienced it themselves and using their experience and new position to pay it forward. And so,
right.
I think that's great. With that, a lot of people reached out to you. A lot of people advocated on your behalf. You said people were praying for you while you were there. You are here right now, sitting in Texas, because of the efforts of other people. When you were there, you had no control. The only thing, you were relying on other people to advocate for you and fight for you.
Right.
Is there anybody out there right now that's in the similar position that you would be advocating for?
There's a list.
Yeah.
There's a list. There's a gentleman who hasn't been declared wrongfully detained named Andre. He's in a Russian prison. He was transiting through a Moscow airport. He had a legal firearm coming from the States going to Azerbaijan or Albania, one of the two. I always get them confused. But he was just transiting through Moscow, and the Russians grabbed him. They're holding him. We're trying to get him back. There's Mark Fogel, who had a little bit of marijuana in Moscow. He's being held. We're trying to get him back. Austin Tice, he's a Texan from Plano. He's been in Syria for 12 years. We're trying to get him back. There are in Russia, in China, Jimmy Lai in China. He was trying to do the right thing in Hong Kong, and the Chinese grabbed him and want to keep him for life. There are a lot of people, Americans, British, Canadians, they're being held by these godless countries for their own private purposes, and they're all political. Yeah. There's no reason why these people can't be let go, kicked out of the country that they're being held in, and sent home. They're not gonna topple any of these world leaders. They're just people. They're just regular people.
Yeah. And I guess that's the point I was trying to make, is that our audience and Americans and people, good people around the world should be aware this is going on.
Yeah,
and be advocates for our fellow citizens who are wrongfully being detained in other countries.
If I had my phone, I could sit here and I could name off their names, because there are lists of them on the internet, and there are just too many. There are too many to go over and try to discuss their cases. But between those that are wrongfully detained, that the State Department can help, and those that are rightfully detained, that the Department of Justice can help, there are a lot of Americans that need to come back from foreign countries, and then there are a lot of dual citizens too. We also have a number of citizens that are being held hostage by Hamas in the Gaza area. Right, wrong, or indifferent, between Palestine and Israel, those hostages need to come home.
Yeah.
And they're not the only ones.
Sounds like you should start an organization, Paul.
Yeah. I've thought about it.
Great 501c3 effort.
Yeah.
Even if it was for advocacy, I think it would be a great.
Yeah.
Because I don't think one exists, by the way.
It doesn't. No. There are some groups that do things in the hostage space. Mm-hmm. Most of them are advocacy related, but it's a niche type of thing. There is Hostage Aid Network that I'm involved with, and I do want to start a nonprofit myself. I mean, right now I'm using GoFundMe for income. Once I'm a bit more settled, and I can look into setting up a nonprofit and organizing fundraising and things like that. I've got a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of things that I want to do. But putting a spotlight on some of these cases, working with families, and then once the hostage returns, working with them in a meaningful way, a concrete way to help them get back on their feet, not just for the first couple weeks, but for the first couple years. That's kind of what I want to do.
So you mentioned the GoFundMe. Do you have a website or anything where people can find how to support?
Yeah, I mean, if they go to GoFundMe and put my name in, or if they put GoFundMe Paul Whelan into Google, they'd find it. But one of my friends from the Navy, actually, from 25 years ago, started a GoFundMe for me. I need medical care, I need dental care, I need some things. So that GoFundMe is helping me with a lot of those those sorts of things. And what it'll transition into is me being able to help other people as well.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll make sure we have it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I appreciate
below.
that.
I want to close it with this, Paul. Incredible example of the human spirit of resilience. And that's what this show is really about, is hearing stories like yours, hearing lessons and communicating to our audience how they can be resilient. And so, do you have any final words for those listening about being resilient in the face of adversity?
In the Marine Corps, we used to always say, when you're challenged, you should fall back and regroup. Don't surrender, don't turn tail and run. Fall back and regroup. And I think if people find themselves in a challenging situation, whether it's at school or at work or standing in line at a grocery store, or if heaven forbid they're taken hostage by a rogue regime, they need to fall back and regroup and just think, okay, what can I do to fight back? How can I resist? Even just singing the national anthems of my country to remain positive and to remain in control. And every day is a new day. Sometimes every hour is a new hour. And just, take the attitude that people are going to come, people are going to help. It will end at some point, but just have, faith in your own spirituality, have faith in your government, your family and friends, that people are going to come and do the right thing for you.
Thank you for that. That's well said. We're here, Paul, because this amazing audience that we have that supports this show, who have been just loyal followers to our show, and they've been very supportive to our guests like you. And we have some amazing sponsors that make the show happen. So we always want to take kind of the end of the show to thank our sponsors. We have Smith & Wesson Firearms, Vortex Optics, Gators Eyewear, BioPro supplements, all natural growth hormone supplement. We have a BioAccelerator, Allied Wealth Management, and Holy Waters. We have some Holy Waters.
Yeah, this stuff's good.
It's good, right? It's just some.
It can't hurt.
Waters. Yeah, yep. It's all these sponsors, by the way, are just amazing people. I know all the owners. I'm friends with them. Nothing we promote, I don't use. So today we have some gifts for you. We have some BioPro. So as you get back into your health, BioPro is all natural, like growth hormone supplement, and I use it to recover from fitness, great for mental clarity, and for sleep. As you're trying to probably get your sleep back in order, I definitely highly recommend you try this stuff. And we got a sample for you, a month supply. If you like it, let us know.
Yeah, certainly.
Keep it coming. Gators Eyewear, been around for 35 years, military, first responder community. Some of the best eyewear you could get, all made in America, and even Ukraine. I've used Gators Eyewear for years in the military, way before I met the company. But just phenomenal glasses and good ballistic lenses and whatnot. And then we asked you what firearm you wanted, and you said you wanted one of my favorites, the J-Frame 357 Airweight. Just an amazing, just simple revolver, hammerless. Like you said, if you ever need it for self-defense, it's one of the best self-defense guns, I think. And this is, Smith & Wesson did this one right. And if you don't feel that, even you don't buy one of these guns, you got to feel it. It's just feels so good.
Just an Airweight, yeah.
Just Airweight. So this could be for you, courtesy of our friends at Smith & Wesson. And again, one of my favorite firearms.
Thanks very much. My first my first firearm was a Model 66, and then a Model 649 was my second. And I've still got both of those. I have other weapons, but I always go back to the simplicity of a Smith & Wesson revolver. I mean, there's nothing like it.
No.
And this model especially is quite lightweight. It's 357, which helps. It's got a lot of, stopping power. It's a good color.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that, revolvers are Smith & Wesson's core.
Yeah.
170-year-old American company, and one of the most patriotic companies in America, and their wheel guns are kind of what made Smith & Wesson. So, and then we got Vortex Optics. So Vortex is incredible because that gun doesn't have an optic mount on it. I want to get you something else from Vortex. So I thought, man, I'll get a rangefinder. Be great in case you ever want to go out bird watching or hunting or go spying. I had to say that.
You gotta watch the tree line. You never know. You never know.
Yeah. So so it's an amazing rangefinder by Vortex. Vortex, another incredible American
perfect.
company.
Thanks.
Great friends there.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yep.
Yeah, these are nice. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I'll be able to use this, in Michigan, chasing animals and friends and whatnot.
Well, and the last thing we have, and I won't make you open it here, but we have a swag bag from Mighty Oaks Foundation. Mighty Oaks Foundation is the foundation that my wife and I founded 14 years ago, and it's first responders and military community. We've served over 500,000 now, and it's an incredible organization. I have a couple of copies of my books in there as well. So
yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
I look forward to reading those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Paul, it was great to have you. Welcome back to America. Welcome to Texas. In fact, I would like to take you from here to eat some good Texas food. So
yeah, I'll do that.
It was great to have you on. God bless you.
Yeah,
Man.
thanks very much.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, God bless you.
Guys, next week, we're going to have another amazing episode. But right now, if you like this episode, please like it, share it, throw a comment in the comment section. And if you're not subscribed to whatever platform you're on, subscribe. And also go to our Patreon. We have some amazing behind the scenes content that we're just starting to get up. So get on our Patreon and join. Love you guys. Thank you guys so much for supporting the show. It's been incredible to watch our numbers continue to increase. We're in the top rankings. I just found out we just hit the top 5% of all podcasts, and we've done that because of our amazing support. So love you guys, and thank you so much. Stay safe and stay resilient. Next week. Hey guys, thank you for watching this episode of The Resilient Show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you hadn't already, please click subscribe so you don't miss any future content. We have so many amazing guests scheduled, and you don't want to miss it.